Okay, so here we are, Sydney Harbour, sunset photography class again, just a small group of students, and look at this perfect sunset we have, just with one of my students, John here. John's playing with his ND set. He's got a 3-stop ND filter, and he's playing with about a 3-minute exposure. It's about 20 minutes now after sunset, so we're basically into the golden hour now. So John's combination is about, as I say, a 3-minute, and he's got an aperture setting at about 16 to 18. Larger depth of field, but importantly, as you can see, just this beautiful cloud structure here. So hopefully we're going to get the clouds just dancing across the sky here, and a 3-minute exposure. If we've done our calculation correctly, we should have a magnificent photo to share with you in a minute. So always, obviously guys, we're on a tripod, the fundamentals, we're on a tripod. We preferably we use a good quality filter system. John's got a lovely Nissi, as I said, a 3-stop Nissi. Ideally what we do is we get a exposure reading before we put the filter in, and then with Nissi they have a fantastic exposure calculator where you enter in the recommended longer exposure from the exposure you have before you put the filter in. Now importantly, what we do is we put the filter in. We first of all we make sure we get our composition correct. We get our focus point on our subject where we want to be with autofocus. And then very importantly guys, we put the camera to manual focus. Now it's highly recommended you do not try and autofocus when you are using a ND filter, particularly with the Nissi kit. So we now are on manual focus. John's just about to turn off his exposure, and we'll have a look at the photo when John finishes it. Whenever you're ready, John. Like, what exposure do you think?
Another 15 seconds.
Yeah, so about 3.5 minutes John will be doing this exposure. So John's just using a simple timer on his smartphone to know exactly where he's at with his time. And when we look at the shot, what we can see there, I was just about to say, what we can see is with his histogram, it gives a really good example of where our exposure is. Now, one thing is that we're really still very much to the left, which basic on the histogram, he's done almost 220 seconds. So John's going to have another go at this because he's clearly slightly underexposing this shot. He probably would have been better at closer to a 4-minute exposure at this time of the evening with his 3-stop. So he's just going to reset his timer, and he's going to run himself out at around a 4-minute exposure. The 4-minute exposure will really allow for the movement of the clouds in the sky. If, however, you are getting conscious of you don't, for whatever reason, want to be going much more than a 3.5 minute exposure, then of course you can let more light in by adjusting your aperture, going to a wider aperture, or increasing your ISO. But obviously we like to, what I call, slow cook the photo. So always remember, when you're on a tripod, the beauty of great night photography is to keep your ISO as low as possible. So what I call, you slow cook the photo. And what I mean by that is you allow the light to permeate onto the sensor much, much slower, so you get a beautiful color saturation in your photos. Ideal particularly for if you want to print one of these memorable photos of a holiday or a sunset here at Sydney Harbour. You want to make sure that you've got really deep, rich colour saturation in these images. And the best way to achieve that is by keeping yourself on a low ISO. So, magnificent night as the ferries go across the harbour here. So, let me come back to you in a minute when John finishes exposure, and we'll share the results with you then.
So here's the result of John's 222nd exposure. And you can clearly see the beauty of the clouds, as we said, dancing across the sky with that lovely smear, or the clouds just running across the top of the sky there through this very long exposure, and the very silky foreground where you can see the very misty, gossamer look of the water because of this very long exposure. And pleasingly, when you get your histogram or your exposure correct, this has required very little editing in Lightroom in post-editing. And this is the pleasure and the beauty of really understanding long exposure and the beauty of crafting with light, so that you get a almost perfect exposure with good colour saturation. And I've got to say, John's done a fantastic job, which required very, very little editing. And he's pretty much ready to go and take that to the printer to get a great photo. So I hope you enjoyed this session. So smash the like button, and if you're local Sydney, we'll catch up soon. Thank you.